I got my rear end kicked, and it's still one of my favorite stories to tell. I'm Mark Copeland. I'm the Value Analysis Whisperer, and this is Sutures and Cents. Welcome to Sutures and Cents. We talk business to clinical, clinical to business, and we talk business to business while still talking clinical to clinical. Sorry, I've changed it. As you noticed, Ryan Pistone is my consigliere. He gets everything right. He fixes everything I do dumb, and he's a good person. You should follow him. He's really smart on marketing. We are Sutures and Cents. Okay, so I'm going to tell the story because it's my favorite business analysis I ever did, and it worked. And I got my brains beaten in at the end of it. But it's a great example of what healthcare, selling into healthcare is like right now. And I think so many people that talk to us about value analysis, this is a good example of a way I learned um, selling something completely different than what I've been selling. So let me reset real fast. 2013, burned out spine rep at a large spine company. Had great people working with me, great accounts, great customers. Couldn't have been better. And I was miserable because we were no longer a startup. It's a personal problem. And I left. Didn't really have a big plan, but was working with a small company with the CEO of a small med device company who had this new disposable laryngoscope blade and handle. And it was really nice. Stainless steel. It was an aluminum handle. It was really well done in a world where everybody was still using reusable. So to understand this, laryngoscopes are used when you go to put an endotracheal tube into somebody. You do that sometimes in the back of an ambulance. Sometimes you do it in the ICU. Sometimes you do it in the ER. But the vast majority of them are done in operating rooms where patients are put under a certain type of anesthesia, where you need the anesthesia machine to breathe for the patient while they're under, right? So they're knocked out. And a laryngoscope, I have one here. I'm going to keep it in the package for a second, is basically an L-shaped handle. It's like a tongue depressor with a light on the end of it and a handle. And they would put it in your mouth, move your tongue out of the way, identify the trachea, and stick an endotracheal tube into it and hook it to the machine so that the machine would breathe for the patient. Pretty simple. So it's basically like an introducer. Uh, um, and so you've probably seen one and you may not have known what it was. So everybody on the planet was buying really well made, reusable handles and blades from German companies that made great instruments, little bulbs that threaded into them. And you'd use those 300, 400 times. Over time, the bulb would burn out and you'd have to replace the bulb. But what you found, what a lot of infection prevention people started complaining about was the handles were hard to clean and the blades were hard to clean. And you're sticking this into the back of someone's throat, right? So there's mucosal secretions you're dealing with. And what a lot of anesthesia teams and hospitals and ambulatory surgery centers did was they'd take it in and they'd clean it with Sidex and rub it off and wipe it off and soak it in something and bring it in for the next one or two cases down the road. And it worked, right? It worked. But quality wasn't wonderful. Compliance was hard to prove, right? And so, but they worked. You'd buy a good one for $300, you'd keep it for 3 years, you'd use it 300 times, let's say, for argument's sake. And so it worked. There was nothing wrong with it. The people using these laryngoscopes did not know there was a problem. So I come out and I'm selling them a completely disposable one in 2015 and for $14. And they would look at me like I had 9 heads. I have a big head. I don't have 9 of them. And so I would say, well, they're like way too expensive. Way, way, way too expensive. Well, so what should the price be? I don't know. Probably around $6 or $7. But I'll tell you this, like we're spending way less than that. I go, well, what are you spending now? I don't know. Of course, I love when people tell you we're spending way less. Well, how much? I don't know. Then you're not sure. Doesn't matter. So these guys would say to me, these anesthesiologists, or sometimes CRNAs would say, oh, we're spending pennies. It's pennies. We buy them for $300. We use them forever. Huh. That's interesting. I don't think that's how that works. And they would say, yeah, look, I use it. And then the next case, I have a new one in my room. Like there was a magical laryngoscope fairy that just between every case flapped in on its wings and dropped a brand new, clean, reusable laryngoscope in their room. Now, once I started figuring it out, I'm like, wait a second. I started talking to sterile processing people. I started talking to anesthesia techs who were in charge of, they were actually the laryngoscope fairies. And I spoke to a couple of them. And they're like, what are these guys talking about? We spend time doing this. And now there's all sorts of problems. And I start to hear about light bulbs disappear. Blades don't work with each other. Like, oh, there's a lot more work to go along with this. And I'll never forget it. I was talking to a chair of anesthesia at a highly prestigious, highly sophisticated hospital in northern New Jersey near New York City. And this guy looked at me and said, Mark, no offense, you should just stop now. We would never buy this. There's no way it makes any sense for us to pay $14 for something that we're doing for pennies. And I sort of drove home a little frustrated. And because I didn't believe it. By the way, if you ever want to really make me go waste a lot of time, money, and spill a lot of blood, it's not give something thought and then tell me I'm wrong. Because now you have now officially lit me up. And I remember going to Delaware 2 weeks later, and I met this anesthesia tech. She was also CRNA. She said, what are they talking about? I've estimated we're spending $20 to $21 every time we do an intubation. And I was, where did you come up with that number? She said, well, when you start to do this and this time, I actually tracked it, measured it, did a whole presentation on it. But time, money. Oh, and she's like, oh, and now? But she's like, oh, we lose stuff all the time. OR probably throws it away. We can never find them. Every year we're spending $15,000 just replacing these things so they don't last 300 times. And she'd done what she called a fully burdened cost analysis. So it wasn't just the price of them, it was what you spent to have them reprocessed, replaced, repaired. And she came up with $20, $21. And we talked about it a lot. And then something else happened. The Joint Commission started saying, hey, you have to follow instructions for use. What do the instructions for use say on these things? And some had to be sterilized. Some had to have high level disinfection. Some of them, it was unclear. And the Joint Commission would say to hospitals, if you're not following instructions for use, we're going to cite you. And all of a sudden, I started getting phone calls for this because places were like, this is too much work. We're spending way too much time and money and effort. And I said, yeah, I've calculated that you're probably spending about 19 to 25. And I've had another person actually calculate it. She does this. She calculated it as $20. And places were like, bring it up here. Let me see this thing. And hospitals started to convert. And I converted, I think it was probably 6 hospitals, sophisticated health systems, by the way. Uh, um, Penn, MedStar, let's see who else. A couple of like big time places. And it wasn't like we had all the business, but we were in them now. They brought us in and took care of some problems, and we were starting to roll out because we were right. They were spending close to $20 to $30 per, but I hadn't described it the right way. And when I started to describe it, there's this much, there's that. I realized how siloed these places are. That chair of anesthesia had no idea what happened to that laryngoscope when it left his room. So he thought there was no work associated with it. He wasn't dumb. He just didn't know. And this anesthesia tech in a little town in Delaware cracked the code for me. And I started making a business analysis, taking these from every place I went. And every place started saying, oh my gosh, yeah, we are spending this much. We should look at yours. And we converted them. And probably our first full year after that, we ended up doing around $300,000. The next year we did 600,000. And we were flying high. I know that's not an enormous business, but it was the first customers of this ever. And then a couple of big companies came in and ran us out. Teleflex, Rouge, crushed us. came out with products that were just as good, if not better, could support them, supply them, and they were about $5 cheaper each, and we got run right out of the building. But it wasn't because we were wrong, and it wasn't because we didn't know what we were doing. We were a little early, and what we should have done was try to sell our line to them or go build a company around it. But we got smoked. But the value analysis of it was we people weren't adding in the cost of time and money and replacement and repairs. And I had to go investigate, ask the questions, get answers, and calculated it. And thank goodness to this person in Delaware who sort of gave me the confidence that I was thinking correctly because independently she had come to the same position and they wanted mine because she'd already proven the business case. So the reason I tell you this is it's kind of a funny story. It was a great story, and then we got run right off the floor. But I'm still proud of what we did. And I learned so much that I've taken every single product I have ever sold since then and tried to apply the same methodology. And you can too. And that's what I do now. So, like, I became a value analysis whisperer with surgeons, with operating rooms, with sterile processing departments, with CRNAs, because when you think they're spending too much money on something, they probably are. They just might not be aware of it and not have time to calculate it. And that's what we do for them. So when we do pro formas, it's just us calculating something for them and then letting them do it. We're not making stuff up. We're not telling them something that isn't true. They just don't have time or they're so siloed they wouldn't see it. That's what we do. And that's what's so fun. Um, even if we get blasted by a big company down the road who does it better than we do. I'm Mark Copeland. I'm the Value Analysis Whisperer. This is a very special Sutures and Cents where I tell you the success and colossal fails I have in my career. See you next week.